Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are all well. And another week, more stuff to talk about and discuss. Sad to say again, our friend Lloyd is unable to join us this week, but not to worry, we have a full house. Apart from that, we have there over in Brussels our Phil Boswell.
You's all doing all right?
No, I'm doing how are you, son?
Aye, magic. It's been a hectic week, hectic times, really busy at work, but you know, some of us are very lucky that we've got jobs. If you've not retired like you, Roddy, and living in the sunshine, wonderful glory days. But no, listen, what's coming down the turnpike, as they say, is not going to be pleasant. There's going to be a massive increase in unemployment. Things are going to get tough. It's really going to get messy. So I'm grateful I'm working and happy to be keeping going. That's for sure.
Well, I would tell you, it's not so sunny here just now, but not be long.
Lovely.
And up there in the City of Discovery, we have our Alan Petrie. How you doing?
Hi, Roddy. I'm doing quite well. Been a busy week this week. Pretty successful as well. I've put in a letter to NHS Tayside with regards to their intimate care and chaperone policy, which I believe breached a number of pieces of legislation. Got a response back today saying that policy is now under full review. I was also head story on Radio Tay today, all day, about the cuts to the social care partnership.
So you've been with a rival radio station, huh? What can I tell you?
Yes,
I bet they don't pay the same fee as us, do they?
It shows one thing, though. The independents could do just as much as what a member of the political parties could do.
Exactly. And of course, up there in Clickmannon, it's everyone's favourite lawyer. It's our Eva. How are you, Eva?
Hi, Roddy. Yeah, like everybody else, very, very busy week. Rounded it off spectacularly today by holding a duster in my hand for the first time for months and doing a bit of spring cleaning. Not something I'll be repeating again later on in the weekend when I intend to be doing the garden and spending some time in the greenhouse.
I've got someone that does that for me. It's much better that way. Anyway, let's get things started. There was a result come through on a by-election actually this week in Kilmarnock, Philip, and there it was, the SNP, although their vote was down by 11.8%, again it's a very low turnout. We had Labour's was down, but the SNP won the seat. Sometimes it's very hard working out these lookouts. It can be, you can win, it's a win or a hold or whatever. But the important thing there is that Reform again stepping in about 10%. The Tories way down, and it seems it's this time and this occasion it's the Unionist vote that says slipped. But a victory is a victory.
Yes, indeed. It's not one I'm familiar with. I know Kilmarnock well because I was a police officer there for a couple of years, so I know it quite well. Great wee town. But and obviously still focused a wee bit more on independence than other places. But that's a massive drop. And again, it's the dissatisfaction, the disenfranchised voters. The big turnout skews all. You can't really. Can you claim a victory when your results are down as far as they are? Well, you did. You won. You kept the seat, or you retained it. Fabulous. It's a win at least for supposedly the good guys. If it was somebody who actually represented independence. The problem is the SNP only purport to represent independence, and it's those battle-hardened warriors that still believe that the only way we can get independence is through the SNP, or the new wave of troffers who understand what's going on. I mean, 21.7%. I see Eva's giving me the heads up on the turnout there. Very, very, very poor. How's that representative of what the people want?
But it's been 21%. I mean, last week we had one, it was 26, which was a big jump. But they are round about the 20%, and it means that 80% are voting for the Apathy Party.
Yeah, not interested, disenfranchised, and we always know, we say all along, every time you get a local by-election, you're going to get a much lower turnout. It's always the case. General elections been at the top, local elections been at the bottom, and obviously we should also be aware the situation that we've got here. When you get local elections, the mandate's totally different. Yeah, the franchise, completely different sets of questions for our issues are addressed by different groups of people. Visiting students can vote in this type of thing. And sadly, that's why we lost the 24 referendum for independence, because we used a local election mandate instead of using a general election or a constitutional mandate, which we should have done, which should have been restricted to those who live in Scotland or have been here for at least 10 years. So again, non-representative, lots like all students in Kilmarnock that are there, or any visitors, they can all vote in this, and quite right too, because it's a local election. But it really is not representative of the mood and for or against independence, because look at the numbers. The SNP are still way below the 53 or so percent, or over 50% of Scots that want independence. So from an independence point of view, it takes us no further forward. What it does, it entrenches the Troffers because they win another seat and get some more bonus points.
Well, here's the thing, Eva, Phil's alluded to it. There's a bigger percentage we know in favour of independence than at the present are voting for the SNP. When will the SNP join the dots? I mean, it's great that this seat is not going to the Unionists, but if we're going to get independence anytime soon, we need that unity.
It's abundantly clear to most thinking people, whether they're members of the SNP or not, that independence is only going to be won when we're not fighting amongst ourselves and when we unite with each other. And there is no greater proof of that than looking at what a supermajority in the Scottish Parliament would comprise and how it would be achieved. It can only be achieved by having on the constituency one pro-independence candidate in each, and on the list a concerted arrangement of pro-independence candidates, not necessarily party. And that will happen when the politicians and the leadership of each party understands that independence is the choice of the people of Scotland, and for Scotland to be a true democracy, then it ill behoves the leaders of the likes of the SNP in particular to do anything other than promote unity. I mean, there was an item in the paper the other day from one of the conventions, was at the Scottish Independence Convention, from Rosa Salih and her colleagues, where they were inviting independence supporting candidates to sign up to, in essence, a sort of declaration of support for independence and support for unity. And they referred in their item to how there would be a number of different independence supporting candidates, and the electorate would need a bit of guidance to find their way around this. Now, with all due respect, we don't need a number of independent supporting candidates standing for each seat and competing with each other and taking votes off each other, because all that will do is give the Unionists an in unnecessarily. We need one candidate for independence in each seat. Now, John Swinney knows this. He understands the electoral system like the back of his hand. He's fought innumerable elections and he's fought some of them very well. But if he wants to fight the 2026 election in the fashion that it should be done, and if he wants his epitaph to be that he assisted in delivering independence to our country, that he restored self-determination to Scotland, then the way to do it is simply to be better together and to reach out the hand of comradeship to Colette Walker, to Kenny McCaskill, or to Ash Regan, whoever may end up leading Alba, and to all the others within the movement who are determined to see our country rise. And it is such an urgent necessity these days when you see what's happening elsewhere in the UK, when you understand that reform are beginning to rise, when you note that austerity is on the cards by any other name for several years yet. We saw today at the Scottish Labour Party conference, Anas Sarwar actually had the gall to announce himself as having just applied to become the next First Minister of Scotland. His allies are tweeting and plastering all over social media this grand announcement that the campaign is now underway and that Labour are delivering for the UK and will deliver for Scotland. Nothing could possibly be further from the truth. the way that politicians will deliver for Scotland is when Scotland keeps its own resources and spends what it earns in Scotland for Scotland, and has a government created by the people of Scotland whose only job is to look after those of us who are living in Scotland, because that's what we want to do. And I sincerely hope that John Swinney understands completely that if he fails to have a united campaign, if he fails to lead a united campaign throughout the movement, if he insists on SNP1 and SNP2 again, all he will do is let the Unionists in here and there in the constituency and in innumerable places on the list. The SNP might remain the biggest party, but the dream of independence will be back down in the doldrums for another 5-year term. And that's the last thing the people of Scotland want or deserve, especially when we know that a majority of us desire independence.
That was, you actually ruined. I was going to have a wee dig at the Labour Party for exactly what you're talking about Annis, but that's it. It was a great start to the Labour Party conference, the British Labour Party in Scotland branch office get together, should I say, Alan, and where they're announcing your man here, the next First Minister. I mean, we heard it with Kezia, we heard it about Wendy Alexander, we heard it about Dick Leonard. They all do this one, and as I said, you've been on the sherry hen a wee bit early. Not going to happen. I mean, they should have. Well, that seat was theirs to win last night, and while it's a low turnout and all the caveats that Phil's put in place, Labour should be mopping them up. They should still be in their honeymoon, but the people are rejecting them.
Yeah, every single election, it's the same thing's happening. People aren't coming out to vote because they're rejecting everyone. I remember the times where local government elections, even if it was just a normal council election or a by-election, they would come out and they would protest against whoever it was that had the purse strings, the Scottish Parliament. They're not even doing that now. They're just sick and tired of all political parties. But I mean, Labour's going on about a new direction. It's not a new direction for Scotland. It's a new direction for the Labour Party. But it's a direction they've been heading for, say, 97, when Blair became Prime Minister. And that's to the right. They've been going to the right and continuing going to the right. That they're coming up and they're making all these promises. The same thing as what they did before May. And every single one of those promises have been broken. And I think we are still stupid enough to actually listen to them. What's going to happen in 26, unless we, the activists of the independence movement, get out on the streets and get the message of independence out, is that people will not come out to vote for that election either. We've got to make sure people are motivated and want to come out for real change, real policies that will actually benefit every single citizen in this country, and that is independence. We cannot rely on the political parties to do that. We all have to take responsibility to get out, speak to neighbours, speak to friends, speak to families, speak to strangers, get them on board with independence, tell them exactly what this means. And if somebody says to you, how will you pay for it? You say the same way every other country pays for their services. Because we are no different from any other country, except we have more resources to do what we want to do. Only by getting up off our backsides and into the streets will we change anything.
That's absolutely true. The Labour Party, Phil, they weren't going to do this, they were going to do that. They've lied and everything. One of the big ones they said is, we're putting money in your pocket and we're not going to raise taxes on the poor and the working people of the UK. Here you go, Labour Council in East Lothian sticking up the council tax, not by inflation, but by absolutely inflation, 10%, when people have got these huge energy bills, where the cost of living's going through the roof. Labour doing what Labour always do, sticking up the council tax. They do it wherever they go. Is it any wonder that the people are sick of them?
No, and we saw it coming, and it's not just here, it's all over the country. I mean, what we've got is a situation where, it's like, welcome to the People's Party, Labour. Aye, right. The red Tories, they are. That's exactly what they are. The reports across media, the STV one was the one that I picked up on. So all across Scotland, this is happening. And so what all the Labour councils have done is they've got together, they've agreed to do it together so that they don't get picked out. I mean, some are more than others, but some of them are increasing it by more than 3 times inflation, as you say. And the nationwide freeze ends in April, which means local authorities can increase this levy by however much they like. In North Lanarkshire and the Borders voted. This is Labour councillors. This is the Labour Party. If you voted for, you asked for this, voted for a 10% rise. Glasgow, 7.5%. Edinburgh, 8%. Fife, 8.2%. With council facing black holes across of millions of pounds in rising service costs, increased council tax is just one of the ways they can plug the gap. But as we said all along, these are councils. This is the Scottish Government and local authorities who have an ever-decreasing budget based upon the ever-decreasing funds and pocket money were handed by Westminster. So we pay in 100, we get 60 back for, say, and next year we'll get 101, but actually inflation takes it, it's actually costing you 110 to do the same work. So you're actually reducing in real terms the services and the funds that you have to even you can't even maintain services when that happens. And that has been happening year after year after year, and it will continue to happen. All the councils face the same. East Lothian was the first council to confirm a rise with an increase of 10%. But the increase will mean households in Band B and D will pay, instead of about 1,600 or just under 1,600, they'll go up to just under 1,600 from about 14, just over 1,400. Now, this is the tip of the iceberg, because what's coming round the corner is a recession. And austerity continues during a recession, and it will devastate many, and of course it will be the poorest and most vulnerable in our society that will again suffer most. So at a time when wages are not even keeping up with inflation, unless you're an MP of course or a senior executive, then we continue to increase the gap between rich and poor. Not the country I want. We look to Scandinavia, a much fairer society and a greater economy and far more equity. That's what we want in Scotland. This is who we are. That's what the Scottish people want. If you voted for Labour, you voted for this. SNP are not changing that, and because the only way we can change that is through independence, nothing less. And here we are, still bickering over the pennies when we should be taking control of our own destiny and looking after our own. It's a disgrace.
Phil's right. I mean, a 10% council tax in East Lothian, that's going to go everywhere, Eva. The money is reducing from they said, oh, we're giving you more money, but as Phil's pointed out, they've given us more in monetary terms, it says, but with inflation, that it's actually coming down. It has been since 2008. I have some sympathy with the councils that they have to, they have to raise extra money to meet services, but 10% seems a bit excessive.
Well, here, Phil, but you thank your lucky stars you don't live like me in Clackmannanshire, where the council are talking about a rise of 13%. The smallest mainland local authority with a population of about 53,000. They're talking about raising it by that much, when this is one of the poorest areas of the country with some of the most vulnerable citizens in Scotland. And that's where we are. But, I would go back to basics here and say exactly what's going on. Why are councils skint? Are councils skint? Is Scotland skint? What is the truth of the matter? Well, the truth is that Scotland would have, as an independent country, an enormous surplus over the course of the first couple of decades of independence, because our priorities would not be the priorities of Westminster. We would not be sending billions to Ukraine. We would not be paying for aeroplanes to fly from Prestwick to Cyprus to assist in the Middle East. We would not be contributing to the cost of weapons of mass destruction on the Clyde. We could use our own resources for the betterment of our own people. We could spend money reopening a ferry route to Europe, to reopen direct routes for tourists coming in and for exporting our goods out. All of that has an immediate impact, and it's only a positive one. And as far as the local authorities are concerned, what they should be doing, those which are SNP controlled like Clackmannanshire, is they should be battering John Swinney's door down, demanding to know what the independence campaign is and when it's getting underway. You know, the SNP in Clackmannanshire periodically deliver a leaflet, usually from Believe in Scotland, with a survey asking folk what it is that they want by way of priorities. And the priority for most of the people in Scotland is to have the ability to eat, to heat, to look after their families, maybe to have a wee bit extra for a treat or for a holiday. You know, people in Scotland generally aren't looking for terribly much. We're basically not a particularly greedy race. But what we are at the moment is a race who are being constantly let down at every turn by those we elected to make our country either independent or better. So it doesn't matter what political party you look at, as Alan has already said, people have lost faith in them all. And that's because they've all let us down without exception over and over and over again. Labour are doing it in Westminster. They'll do it again if they get into get enough whiff of power in Holyrood. The SNP have steadfastly let us down now for the best part of a decade. And one area that needs enormous overhaul is in respect of public bodies, what you might also refer to as quangos. They are probably without number in Scotland now. You don't know how many there are. You don't know what they all do, but they all function on government money. Some of them duplicate what each other does. And the common denominator is there are revolving doors of the people who work in each of these places, and the salaries bear no relation to the return on the money. So Scotland needs a clear out, but I think it should begin at the top, in the sense that the SNP leadership should realise independence, nothing less, and have a top-down position whereby the money filters down, everybody benefits from it, provided that there's a brave and very deliberate, planned process of delivering independence and then creating the country that we need by addressing all of our ills, from poverty to, you know, a stagnant economy, and looking at being able to trade with our neighbours, building houses, grasping the energy programme. All of that stuff needs to be done. And it can be done if the right people are in leadership and the right people are in charge of individual government departments or projects. And sadly, that is not the case for most of them at the moment.
No, maybe, Alan, what we're needing, the big thing at the moment over in the United States, of course, is DOG, where they're ground finding all this money and waste. Now, we know in Scotland, for example, the amount of money that's been spent on Stonewall stuff and DEI stuff. Maybe we need a wee dose of DOGE here to pull out some of this waste and get rid of it and put it where we need it most in local services.
I mean, if we could get the right people to do that, then yeah, it's spot on. Because there is a lot of waste in local government and a lot of waste in normal government. But I mean, even if you look at the amount of empty houses that are in each council area, there's thousands of empty houses. There's lots of homeless people that could be using those houses. And the one way that they could get these houses back into use is by cancelling all the housing debt. I mean, tenants now are still paying for debt on houses that were bought under Thatcher. We're still paying their debts off. If they scrapped the debt and allowed that money to be reinvested into bringing these properties back up to proper standards, we could get these houses back into use, and that'll be more council tax coming into the council. Because once you've got the house, they could be paying council tax. The holiday homes should be taxed at least 100%. They should be charged for their building rather than getting a percentage taken off because they're not living there all the time. It's a house, it's in a local community, they use the services. They should be paying exactly the same thing. The other thing they could do is look at council reorganisation, because in my opinion, they got rid of the wrong councils. They should have kept the regional councils and not the district councils, because you have big cities who have most of the services, most of the employment, but all these employees are going out with the city and spending their money. We're getting the bill for the roads and the maintenance of all these properties. So there's lots of things that could be looked at. The other thing, like you said, stop investing in these lobbying groups. Stop investing in the woke policies. They're not needed. They are not required in this society. There's more important things that need to be funded. I mean, Dundee just now, I mentioned at the beginning of the show, £19 million from this health and social care partnership. Those are the most vulnerable people in the city. Why are they being made to suffer? Because you cannot run a proper budget. And if you can't get money when you've got the former finance minister as the sector, as the MSP, you've got the council run by the MSP. I think you've got to learn how to lobby your own party a wee bit better to get better settlements. The people should not be suffering because you cannot run a local council. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but we can also, I mean, I passed a motion at a conference for the land, roof and ground tax to replace council tax. And that's something that can be done with devolution. And it's a fairer way of raising tax, and it's a better way of raising, and you can raise a lot more. But no one seems to have the courage to change it. But moving on, there's a couple of things I want to talk about here in one, Phil. And one of them, the first one was, it was announced, we had a quick talk about this last week, but down south, Thames Water has been kept afloat with some corporate socialism that all the right-wingers hate. They've been given $3 billion of your taxpayers' money, ladies and gentlemen, for a water company, and the first thing they'll do, no doubt, is increase the dividends out to their shareholders and to their directors. But at the same time, they find $3 billion for that. They can find $3 billion a year, Phil, for given to Ukraine. But what they can't find $3 billion for is, of course, Grangemouth. Now, this week we had the Unison General Secretary talking about, she wanted action, she wanted to see this, that, and the next thing, and they were outside, picketing outside the Labour conference in Glasgow today. But surely the union chief could say to the refineries in England, right, guys, everybody out until we save this refinery. Solidarity of the workers. That's what's required, not more rhetoric.
Correct, absolutely correct. I mean, we'll start with Sharon Graham first. I mean, she's coming out saying the government must be forced to act to save Grangemouth refinery. What's she doing about it? You're quite rightly pointing out. Now, this is the Unite General Secretary and the Scottish Secretary, Derek Thompson, both called for action from ministers at Westminster and Holyrood. But was the leverage that the unions used to have over Labour is gone? They no longer have the leverage they used to, because Labour isn't a party of the people anymore. It's just the Red Tories. So these union leaders can talk all they want. They've insisted that the Labour government must be forced to act, right, to save Scotland's only oil refinery. And she said that she branded the plans for closure of the refinery a horrific act of industrial vandalism. Sound familiar? Bathgate no more, Linwood no more. It just goes on and on. Where's Ravenscraig? And what did the unions? What's actually happening here? The deconstruction of our country as a potential freestanding independent nation. I mean, you can build it again, but the damage that's been done will cost us even more and take longer to repair. And what we're looking at here with the Freeports is sabotage of our country to a degree that will take us decades to get out of potentially. So no, this is a continuation of the union to talk the talk but not walking the walk. On Thames Water, this is a $3 billion corporate bailout. Okay, they're handed a $3 billion lifeline today, and it was quite recent, and it was the High Court approved its plans for an emergency restructuring. You've got to go to the High Court, and because it's Thames Water, I mean the judge involved criticised saying these costs were eye-watering. Now it was a ruling by Justice Leach, who said the utility company could press ahead with a scheme which will save from imminent financial collapse. It's been on the verge of collapse, teetering on the abyss for ages now, and it's likely a special administration rescue by the government is called in. The plan will provide $1.5 billion immediate life-saving funding, with a further $1.5 billion potentially available on a 9.75% interest rate. However, the judge was really super critical of the enormous fees, interest and other costs of the restructuring scheme, running to hundreds of millions of pounds, which he described, as I said, as eye-watering. Now, he said, and this was in the Evening Standard, this is a quote from the Evening Standard, they quote him as saying, "Customers and residents who are struggling with their bills will be horrified at these costs and mystified how Thames Water Group has been able to fund them or why it has agreed to do so." Again, at a time, all your costs are going up. basics are going up, energy, all your utilities are going up, food's going up, your prices are coming down. That you're getting in terms of wages in real terms, your funding for your local authorities is coming down. I mean, this ruling is going to. This ruling could hit about 800 million, including 210 million of legal and other advisory fees. That's how much it's going to cost. So the restructuring is going to cost $1 billion, right? Now remember, this is a privatised water company. Like the rest of them, it faces a crisis which follows decades of poor regulation, poor regulatory oversight, and allowed company owners to pay themselves billions of pounds in dividends instead of using money to maintain the infrastructure. It's happened everywhere it's been privatised. They'll do it to Scottish Water if we let them. And Thames Water has the highest ratio of debt to equity of any UK water company. And fines imposed by the regulator. The regulator is called Ofwat, the OFWAT, and it's based on the fines are for poor performance, and that has obviously made things worse. It's the largest water company by a distance, has the worst record in England and Wales, because they haven't got their hands on Scottish water yet, and it's chronic leaks. It's one of the biggest clean-up bills they face, and it needs to spend, by their calculation, $24 billion through to 2030 to fix the leaks. They need to boost sewage treatment capacity and make the country's water network more resilient to the weather extremes. Now, here's the thing. What would get you out of jail for a wee bit and make you last a wee bit longer? Why don't we pump millions of this sewage into the sea and into our rivers? That was designed to relieve the pressure on private companies so the shareholders could continue to get their dividend. That's what it's about. It's about money, and it's about they don't give a damn. They'll dump what they want where they want. They couldn't care less about the people. And bear in mind, this came in 1989. So when the Thames Water was privatised, that's when it started. The slate of debt was wiped absolutely clean. It didn't have any, and its indebtedness remained below the industry's average until it was bought by Kimball in 2006, a consortium led by fund manager, right, equity fund manager, Macquarie Group from Australia. And they used the securitisation model, pushed the company's debt above that of its peers, and in the following years the gaps widened. So why are we surprised when the private sector keeps feeding itself through its lobbying and control over its government? Our government's supposed to be revolving doors all over again. It comes up every week. That's why we're in the mess we're in, and we need to lock these revolving doors and throw these people out.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I said, Eva. It's I paired them together, the Thames Water and Grangemouth. But remember, Sarwar saying, "Oh, well, it's a private company, Grangemouth, so we can't interfere."
Exactly.
But they're interfering into the Thames Water, and this won't be the only water company. The bills are going to keep coming, and the same people who they won't think about nationalising it ever. They won't come back to say that's what we need to do. And they're the same people that want to do the same to the health, the NHS as well.
They're just red Tories, that's all they are. On the question of the unions, some of the unions now are almost unrecognisable. They've transformed themselves into something entirely different from that which they originated in. I mean, Unison in particular voted last week and passed a motion to the effect that trans women are women. And you know, the likes of Barbara Castle and others around her who fought very hard and very well for women's equality, for equality of the sexes, would be burling in their graves to see something like that develop, because it's not representative of grassroots feeling. The Royal College of Nursing's similar. It has obviously a same very controversial stance. But the other aspect that's really important in respect of unions is they were supposed to be organised as a nationwide, i.e. throughout the United Kingdom entity, so that we often hear or heard from the Labour Party that the argument against Scottish independence was that workers in, for example, Grangemouth or Peterhead had just as much as in common with workers in Grimsby and Peterborough as they did with other people around the world. Well, that's clearly not the case if the workers at the refineries in England, who are looking forward to expanding and already are expanding, on the back of Grangemouth closing, can he stand up for their Grangemouth peers, their Grangemouth colleagues? There are already hundreds of people who were employed in Grangemouth who've left. They didn't wait for the redundancy notices because they were too scared to do that. Many of them have gone abroad already for work elsewhere, or they've relocated elsewhere within the United Kingdom. So the depletion of human talent, the brain drain out of Grangemouth is already happening. It's industrial vandalism on an enormous scale, but it's social vandalism. It is the death of the futures of hundreds of children not yet born who could have been working apprenticeships in Grangemouth and the surrounding area. And it's happening because it's a very deliberate policy of scorched earth relative to Scotland. We will become, as we've said so many times, the only first world country that produces its own oil and has to send it elsewhere to be refined. Now, Sharon Graham from her union, she could stop that in a heartbeat. She could go to her union colleagues elsewhere in the United Kingdom and plead the case for Grangemouth, the case for Scotland. Anna Sarwar could do the same. Brian Leishman, my MP, claims that he's done that, but obviously Keir Starmer repeatedly throws him a deefy. And that's what's wrong with the United Kingdom, because Scotland is not too wee, not too poor, but we are too stupid if we let them get away with this. And this kind of thing is going to happen over and over again until Scotland does become a desert, because we will continue to be bled dry for our resources, whereby unless and until we get that unity within the movement that we spoke about earlier and we speak about every week. In Scotland, we don't need everybody to support independence coming from either the left or the right or the centre. We need them coming from right across the whole spectrum. It's what Phil says often, that we need conservatives in Scotland. Of course we do. We need small, medium and large businesses in Scotland, but we need to have a heart in Scotland in terms of our society and our community and what it is that we think we should be doing as citizens, not as subjects. And ultimately, all of the talk about the economy and money that will be made available for private companies is about money that's being taken away from the workers that create the wealth. And it's a problem that's been there since time immemorial, and it will be there unless and until the people take control. And the Scottish people have got a chance to do that next year if we get our act together. And if we do it first, maybe the people of England will be able to follow after us, and they can have their independent England and we can have our independent Scotland, and we can be friends together and allies.
Hear, hear. But as I say, it could be very easy for them to do it, but they don't care about Scotland. I mean, we found that the Labour Party, we know the Scottish National Party government have not done enough to help Grangemouth. They're just now starting to talk a wee bit about it, and John Swinney thrown 25 million quid, which is nothing in comparison. But 3 billion to Thames Water. If you gave 3 billion, we could save Grangemouth, we could upgrade it, we could make it the top refinery in the country. But it's never going to happen. All we're going to get now is rhetoric, and Labour are trying to blame the SNP for what is a Westminster decision.
Same as they always do. They always try to pass the buck to the ones with less power than they have. But, I mean, Thames Water, if they want to get investment in there, take the money back off of every single one of their shareholders who have enjoyed massive dividends over the years because they have not been investing into their supply. That's where they should be getting that money from. Take it back off of these people who have effectively stolen that money, because that money should be reinvested into the system to help the customers. But on the trade union, and this is one thing that annoys me with trade unions, they speak with forked tongue. I mean, take Unite, going back in history. They started off as the AEU. They then amalgamated with the Scab Union at Wapping and become the AEEU. They then amalgamated with the Scab Union from Timex, the MSF, and become Amicus. They are now Unite. And every single time they amalgamated with others, they were still funding the Labour Party. Now, Tony Benn once told me that the problem with the leadership, with the trade unions, is the leadership are now on bosses' wages, while their members are struggling to put food on the table and money in their meter. Mm-hmm. They do not suffer the same as what their members do. And that is the biggest problem, because they're more concerned with union funds, because if they break the law, their funds could be sequestrated. It's time they realised we would not have a trade union movement if it was not for people breaking the law. If the law is unjust and it keeps the people down, it should be broken. And the people are the ones with the power. The politicians have power because we lend it to them. The bosses have power because we work for them. We are the ones with the real power, because if we withdraw our labour, they're going no place. They are losing lots of money. If you cannot withdraw your labour, then you're nothing but corporate slaves. And that has got to change. We have to look back to our forefathers and start getting the backbone and the political will that they had. And if that means unauthorised strike action, then that's exactly what they should be doing. And the trade unions immediately should stop funding the enemy, which at this present time to workers is the Labour government.
Here. I mean, unfortunately, though, just like Blair and Kinnock, when the Labour Party switched sides, the trade unions have switched sides. They're now on the side of the bosses, not the workers. That's the tragedy. But all the time we're on this show, we do it to say we need to get out of the union. We need to be independent. And here's another one today that really gets me. I want to put up, again, Phil, I'm going to put up two pictures. The first one is this. You've probably heard this. A woman was 74. She was arrested and handcuffed for protesting silently protesting about abortion. Now, I take no position in that. I don't personally believe in it, but I wouldn't stop people doing it. It's the right of people to choose. But she's quite right to have her protest, and she was arrested. But you know what, I go back and hark back is to someone who wasn't arrested for holding up a placard, which I think was more offensive than that woman's placard. And that's this one. Thank Godly. Trump is well, he may be, but she did, look, policeman's giving her a high five. But they arrest an old woman of 74 for standing outside an abortion clinic. Our society is up, Phil, when that's what's happening.
Yeah, there's absolutely no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. Far more offensive. Whether we agree with Jane, God rest her, or not, that's a word that I try not to use. You know, if most women find it very offensive, and a lot of people do, but freedom of speech I'll defend, absolutely, because it's so important. But the critical issue here is, and it's reported across the BBC, across all the major news areas, and it's basically a 74-year-old woman. She's become the first person to be arrested and charged under a new law in Scotland banning protests outside abortion clinics. So this is close to the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital in Glasgow, right? And she was charged in connection with a breach of an exclusion zone. So this is something obviously Leah would be able to speak to in more detail and with more accuracy. But they removed a sign from the area which had been held by the woman who was arrested that read, "Coercion is a crime, here to talk only if you want." What's wrong with that? What is wrong with that? I mean, that's freedom of speech. It's civil. She wants to have civil dialogue. And the Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Act came into force last year. Right now, freedom of speech, we know, we talk about it a lot here. For me, it's the most important right that we have, because it is the right with which we protect all other rights. And we already have restrictions on speech. We cannot incite violence. And of course there's defamation, and that revised law, the Defamation and Malicious Publication Scotland Act 2021. But I mean, Lindsay's reported that the act in terms of the act in terms of what this woman's just been charged with, okay? The Abortion Services Safe Access Zones Act came into law on the 21st of April 21. And the substantive provisions of the Act have now come into force as at 8th of August 22, right? So that's been there for a while. But this is the purpose of this new legislation is to simplify. Sorry, that was the defamation. What they've done with this Act now, they're trying to prohibit you from standing outside and making it a safe area so people don't get upset when they go into an abortion clinic. Now, you can understand that because someone getting in there is under huge pressure. But freedom of speech is freedom of speech. you know, it's a really, really touchy one. For me, I will defend freedom of speech. I don't want to see any more deterioration or dilution of our right to freedom of speech, because they're getting cut left, right, and centre. And I mean, look at this safe zones. It harks to me of you're unable to campaign or protest outside the Scottish Parliament. Remember that piece of legislation they tried to put through, and that is in an area where it's designed. The people, the architect that designed the Parliament in Scotland at Holyrood, designed that for public protest and for public space and for people to interact and to have dialogue, because that's what you're supposed to do in parliaments. This is taking us the wrong way. Safe access zones is part of the woke setup. Don't get me wrong, do we want to keep people safe? Yes, but we need freedom of speech. And if you're offended, you know what? Freedom of speech, for as far as I'm concerned, gives me the right to offend you. If you're offended, I mean, we as nationalists, we as Scottish nationalists, our existence offends, and mere existence offends people. Should we cease to exist? Damn no, there's no way in planet Earth that's going to happen. So stand up, speak up, stand up for your rights, 100%.
I think if you asked the unionists, they would say, yes, we have no right to exist. They would get rid of us tomorrow if they could. But even on this subject, I mean, I find I back Jane Godley's to hold up that. I find it distasteful. I think it was wrong, but I back her to be able to do that in a democracy. Same as this old lady. I don't agree with her stance. However, I disagree that she gets arrested for a peaceful demonstration. It's you know, and they talk about Russia and North Korea and China. We're worse.
Well, for once, I'm going to disagree with you both.
Oh, good on you.
Because this is about safe access zones, so that women who are going for terminations are not confronted by people who think that they can somehow impose their views upon them. I know you say it's a silent protest, but it's a very, very difficult set of circumstances for any woman to look for treatment that requires the termination of a fetus, the termination of a pregnancy. So I will support till the day I die the right of a woman to choose, because some of these women will be the victims of violence, some of them will be victims of rape, some of these women won't be women, they'll be young girls. Some of them will be victims of incest, they will be victims of the most awful crimes known to humanity. And I absolutely, completely, and will always support their right to seek medical treatment as and when required, without being observed, spied upon, and even it can feel like harassment even when it's silent. That said, even although Rose Doherty did break the law because she was within a zone she ought not to have been in, my objection is to the fact that she's 74 years old and the police thought it was appropriate not just to put her under arrest, but to handcuff her. And I want to know what it was about her behaviour that required her to be placed into a set of handcuffs. She wasn't fighting, she wasn't kicking off, she hadn't threatened anybody. As far as I'm aware, she'd not spoken a word, let alone raised her voice. Yet she was handcuffed and bundled into the back of a police car. Now, think for a minute about the contrast in respect of the manner in which Police Scotland, on innumerable occasions in the last few years, have treated the trans activists, the men and the women who have deliberately often attended women's events and shouted women down, wouldn't let them speak, bawled and shouted, played loud music, made threatening comments to them, even to the extent of being outside the Scottish Parliament during the course of the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, when there was one particular fellow who had a walker and he was screaming and shouting and running his walker towards the women who were there exercising their right, their democratic right to peaceably protest. The noise, the racket, the threats of violence, the violent exchanges were all, without exception, created by the counter-protesters who in the main were men. And through all of these events, not one of them, not one was arrested, let alone placed in handcuffs, even although their behaviour was frightening, aggressive, and at some stages violent. And the most obvious event like that was in Duthie Park in Aberdeen, when one of these activists punched one of the women and remains at large at liberty, despite the fact that that event was witnessed by several witnesses. There was corroboration, there was positive identification, and the perpetrator wasn't even spoken to by the police. So I would suggest there is something very, very wrong at large in the state of Police Scotland today when a 74-year-old woman is handcuffed and young, able-bodied men can shoot their mouths off and they can behave in a violent manner and nothing happens to them. You know, the other contrast or the other comparison to be made with this is when you have, for example, football fans rampaging through the centre of Glasgow and not one of them's arrested, but 3 or 4 or 6 weeks later there's an appeal with some video footage and some CCTV. Does anybody know this fellow? We're looking for him. Or when there's an orange walk and a priest gets spat on and it's several days before anybody else is arrested. But one wee elderly woman, not actually that much older than me now, is standing with a placard, silently breaking the law. The police deem it appropriate to huckle her away in handcuffs. That's not the Scotland that I thought I would live to see.
No, but there are two laws. That's the fact. That in many ways we're agreeing, actually. We weren't disagreeing so much either. Because my point is that, you know, one law should apply. It should apply for everybody. I believe in the freedom of speech of people. Do you have an opinion on this, Alan?
Yeah, I mean, this is actually quite a difficult one because freedom of speech is very important and people's right to demonstrate is important. But so is a woman's right to choose without being judged. But there is maybe another way of dealing with this, and that is by providing patient transport. So as people are going in and out the facilities without having to walk past individuals, without even having to see them to get in and out. But then that would just cost money, wouldn't it? It's a lot cheaper just to withdraw other people's rights. And I mean, Eva is quite right about that 74-year-old woman. I mean, we've already been told that if Netanyahu landed by plane in our country, he would not be arrested under the international arrest warrant. But they're able to arrest a 74-year-old woman and handcuff her because she had an opinion and possibly said a silent prayer. Well, it's an extremely difficult one, and I think it could be looked at in a different way, and there's other ways of dealing with this issue, so as that both sides are able to do what they're doing.
But other things are going throughout the world. Now, we can't let this go by, Phil, without talking about this week, where a lot of the neoliberals, neocons, the globalists, the WF have been really upset. Now, we on here as all anti-war people have been desperate to see the wars ending in the Middle East, West Asia and in Ukraine. And lo and behold, Big Donald shot, he side-footed everyone and went to Saudi Arabia for direct talks with the Russians to stop this. Now, it just almost confirms what we've been saying for ages, and people who say, no. It's a proxy US war. It's a war between US, NATO and Russia. And Mr. Trump has seen the writing on the wall. It's a war that can't be won by NATO. It's been lost. And he looks as if he's trying to get a win out of it by ending the war. But it upset an awful lot of people, that, Phil.
Yes, and it's all the money men, it's all the big corporation heads and the warmongers. So, I mean, I found a Newsweek article quite good on this, and it was the heading, if you want to check out, it says Trump gives Europe 3 weeks to sign Ukraine's surrender. That just catches a lot of points for me. There's no doubt that these terms will be entirely compliant with what Russia wants. It went to war over Ukraine and NATO in Ukraine. So US saying the NATO won't be in Ukraine, no shit, Sherlock, really? That's not up for debate. That is what Russia requires, and it went to war to prove it. So no one's going to change it or take that away from them. Ukraine fought hard. It was the best army that Europe had trained, and the NATO forces had trained and equipped. Bear in mind, not a NATO country, and we trained and equipped them. Over 600,000 men in total. So they were excluded from discussions. Well, to be honest, fair enough. They're completely defeated in a war that they, supported by the West, started. And if you have any doubt Do some homework on the history of Ukraine, Stepan Banderas, the Minsk Accords, the Maidan Revolution. Then we can have a conversation. Because if you're getting your information only from Western mainstream media, then you're not well informed on this subject. Russia are smart enough to take the opportunity Trump presents, which will stop the senseless waste of life. Around 1.1 million Ukrainians dead, the vast majority being men and mostly young men. And also Trump wants to put America first. And this involves removing US involvement in this war. So whatever you think of Trump and his party, what they're doing right now over this issue is a very good thing, and mostly they're doing it for the right reasons. Though, of course, the US won't miss the opportunity to take the glory for stopping this war by pulling the rug from under the Europeans. And if you haven't seen it, I suggest you watch Vice President Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, a meeting of all the currently most influential Western warmongers on the planet that you spoke about in your question earlier, Roddy. This speech that the Vice President gave is about Europe standing on its own 2 feet and paying for its own defence. Again, you may not like the messenger or the party behind him, but the message is excellent news for the peacemakers and for those of us that want to live in a civilised society without war. Now, as I've recounted a couple of times, I won't go into any detail here, I was part of a Scottish Government delegation to NATO headquarters as a guest of the US mission, and then visited SHAPE, which is Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, to speak again to the General in charge. And it was all to answer one question. If Scotland becomes independent, will you join NATO and therefore commit to at least 2% of your GDP on defence? Why is that important? Well, the Munich Security Conference is all full of these Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all the big military, the military-industrial complex basically, and the lobbyists that represent them and the politicians that stand up for them. That's what this is about. Your 2% of your GDP is spent and they get the profit out of it. That's why we go to war all the time. And I commented at the time that we probably would, as in Scotland, would probably, because we just, as you know, Roddy, we've talked about a few times, voted to join NATO and switch our position. And I believe that at the time was the right move. It would also mean committing the 2% spend. And at a time when Trump was running, this was 2016, when Trump was running for office and had told America and the world that he was going to cut the US funding to NATO from 70%, yes, NATO is funded by America to the tune of 70% of its spend. It was going to cut it down to 50%, and obviously that would mean a massive cut and massive loss of profits. So Trump is back in power. He's actually doing it now. The 20,000 troops he removed from Germany, from a total of around 38,000 stationed there, some of whom have been moved back to man the Mexican border. Europe is going to have to stand up for itself, and NATO's influence will decline. Of that, there is no doubt.
On this summit, the two things on it, Eva, there was a summit of the European leaders, and they were going to put Trump in his place. They were going to do this, that, and the next thing, and then the next day they rode back. No soldiers were getting in. They were going to do nothing. But what really got me this week was, and I've been very vociferous in my opposition to the war, but it's also I've been vociferous about Ukraine and the regime that's running there. But John Swinney, all of us in Scotland, told us that Scotland stands with Ukraine. Well, I'm speaking for me, and you can speak for you. I do not stand with a fascist regime anywhere in the world. And how dare John Swinney, on behalf of Scotland, say that we stand with a fascist regime who don't, the man's in without an election. They banned political parties. He put his opponents in jail. He broke down the church in Ukraine, and he killed American journalists. For example, I forgot his name now. The man Gina Laura or something. I don't support that. John Swinney had no right on behalf of Scotland to say that. He should go on with doing his day job, which is getting independence and leaving the international stuff till we're international.
There's an awful lot in there, Roddy. In terms of the EU, my blood was running cold when there was talk of a European army, and it got colder still last week when Keir Starmer was talking in terms of the potential for British boots on the ground. And I feel really uneasy that we've had the spectacle in the last Westminster Parliament of several SNP MPs going to Ukraine to support the Ukrainians, wearing British Army uniforms and giving press releases with the Ukrainian flag in front of them beside the Union Jack. And I cannot understand why an SNP First Minister thinks that the people of Scotland as a whole support Ukraine in this war. The people of Scotland, I would imagine, support peace and peacemaking efforts in Ukraine and elsewhere, in fact, everywhere else within the world. But there are people from Ukraine temporarily or permanently settled in Scotland, and from my perspective, they're welcome to be here, very welcome, as are refugees from any other war zone anywhere in the world, and that includes Russia, it includes Gaza, it includes anywhere in the Middle East. But where I'm really troubled is I can't help but think that John Swinney's using this as a distraction because it can be controversial. It's something for him to be interviewed about. And if he's talking about Ukraine and Russia, he's not talking about independence. When he's talking about that, he's not talking about the debacle of NHS Fife and NHS Scotland and the gender recognition reform difficulties. You know, he was asked the other day about NHS Fife and support for single-sex services, and especially, obviously, for women's single-sex services, given the Sandy Peggy case. And he had the gall to yet again speak with forked tongue. And he said, the Equality Act is very clear, the legislation is crystal clear. But what he was dodging was that A, there is no discretion. B, he spoke about guidance instead of speaking about the specific terms of the law and the legal provisions, because the workplace regulations from 1992 don't give discretion, they don't comprise guidance. They're a legislative requirement for single-sex spaces to be provided where people have to change, a set for men and a set for women. There is no discretion. But thirdly, the worst aspect of all of this is that John Swinney continues to conduct the court proceedings commenced by his predecessors, whereby his government has argued at the Supreme Court, and they're now waiting for the decision, that biological sex does not any longer mean biological sex, because they argued that a GRC changes your sex for all purposes. So for all of these reasons, John Swinney probably quite enjoys the respite of talking about Ukraine or Europe or America or Putin or Trump, because it means he's not having to focus on what is happening at home, that where he has specific, complete responsibility for the government of Scotland. He can't affect what happens in Ukraine. He can't change what happens in Gaza. He can change what happens in Scotland, and that's what he should be signally focused on doing every single moment of his working day.
You should. The clock's beating us, Alan. There's something I want to go through, because not only did the American government upset Europe and all the EU and the NATO by cutting the legs away from them by doing this and excluding them. Phil was talking about Vance in Germany, but here's a wee clip of him where he was laying down a big lecture, and I mean really bitch slapping the Germans, but I think it was to everyone in Europe.
Germany's entire defense is subsidized by the American taxpayer. There are thousands upon thousands of American troops in Germany today. Do you think that the American taxpayer is going to stand for that if you get thrown in jail in Germany for posting a mean tweet? Of course they're not, right? So the point that I try to make to our European friends, and I think that they're our friends, I believe that, I know President Trump does, is that friendship is based on shared values. You do not have shared values if you're jailing people for saying we should close down our border. You don't have shared values if you cancel elections because you don't like the result, and that happened in Romania. You do not have shared values if you're so afraid of your own people that you silence them and shut them up. So let's have shared values. Let's defend democracy. Let's have free expression, not just in the United States, but all over the Western world. That is the path to strong alliances in Europe.
Very stirring stuff. What he forgot to say, of course, though, Alan, was that In America, if you say free Palestine, or, you know, bad Israel, you're going to jail. Trump's going to deport you. They're going to remove your funding. So there's a wee bit of hypocrisy in there. But I get his message. It's ridiculous that people are getting jailed for a tweet, or getting jailed for standing in a silent protest, for tying ribbons to a lamppost. It's getting to the ridiculous stage, Alan.
Yeah, I mean, everybody will know my feelings on Trump, but I am loving what he is saying just now, because he's going to withdraw troops from Europe. Don't forget us. Take your troops, take your weapons, get them back to your own country, because you know what? It means that we'll not be fighting their illegal wars anymore. Because the vast majority of wars aren't started by Russia, they're started by America. And it's all to do with money. Same with Europe. I mean, Europe used to be a good idea, bringing all nations together to help with people immigrating, shared borders, free trade. It's a good idea. But then capitalism come in, and those who were in the power started getting money, and they love getting lots and lots of money. And they just kept putting the workers down, doing away with all the legislation that they used to have to bring workers' wages up, workers' conditions up. And now they're looking at going into the market of wars, something that Europe was never, ever intended to do. NATO was supposed to be a peacekeeping nation, no longer, because war means money. You get money from wars. And they're not interested in keeping the peace. And I don't care who it is that is talking to Russia, as long as they're talking to get peace in that area.
Good.
Don't send peacekeeping forces in there, because there's nothing peaceful about them. It's the forces part. Russia don't want these forces on their border. Make them neutral. Exactly the same way as Austria was made neutral after World War II. That's how you get peace. You take people out of the war zone.
As someone who, on February 22, the minute the Russian tanks rolled across the border, I was shouting for a ceasefire, get called all sorts of things, pro-Putinist, you know, traitor, all those things. But 1 million souls have died on the Ukrainian side alone. They figure 100,000 Russians are possibly, we won't know till later how many, but so many lives lost in this. 7 million Ukrainians have left Ukraine, never to go back. They figure that the population can never recover. They've lost 25% of their land mass. And today I was reading again of they're planning another invasion into to Russia in the Bryansk area to try and get some leverage. The Russians know they're coming. The Russians are waiting. There's 5,000 Ukrainians about to go into a slaughter, a meat grinder. Another 5,000 wasted lives. Let's just stop the killing. Eventually you have to go to talk. As even Churchill said it, it's not war, jaw you need. And that's what we need. Let's stop the killing. I'm delighted that there's going to be peace talks, and I hope it happens soon. And I hope, before I see you all again, you and yours are well. Take care. See you soon.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.